Well, we are wrapping a roller coaster ride of a holiday-shortened week. The Dow clawing back market sell-off losses from geopolitical volatility earlier in the week, and U.S. stocks soaring as Trump called off his threatened tariffs on European allies over Greenland. Now, Trump saying he had drawn up a framework of a future deal with NATO leaders for the Arctic island, but Denmark's prime minister stressing that the sovereignty of its territory is not up for discussion. Well, joining me on this Friday morning is Peter Tuchman, senior floor trader at TradeMas. Peter,
good morning,
what a
good
week.
morning.
Happy Friday. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, my pleasure.
So here we are on this Friday morning. We are looking at the futures for the major stock averages pulling back slightly, but we did see that sharp sell-off. So what do you make of what we saw this week?
You know what? It's really extraordinary. I mean, obviously, look, we know that, when you talk about uncertainty and you talk about tariffs, the market responds accordingly, and it responds quite aggressively. We know that January has been a bit of a lackluster January. We did come out of the gate with some bank earnings that were a little bit less than robust. I think as affected by the interest rate story, right? And so that's coming out of the gate. Let's realize that earnings are what happened, last couple of months, and not what's looking towards the future. But this week was extraordinary. We knew that the U.S. President Trump has a track record when it comes to Davos and when it comes to his new sort of megalomaniacal approach to the world at the moment, and I think it's got everybody a little bit on edge. We went into Venezuela, not really sure the motivation there, and then we go to Davos, and as I've mentioned to you many times, if you go back to Davos and Trump 1.0, the last time he was in Davos, not the last time, but one of the older times he was in Davos, the first time he ever mentioned China and tariffs was that day that the market sold off 1,400 points. By day's end, we had rallied 2,800 points and closed up 1,400 points. So we know that Mr. Trump's negotiating tactics are to throw out a big swath of aggressiveness and then sort of pull back. And we should have known that, right? But, when you're in the moment, people are, obviously anxious. And so we went into Davos with this sort of attack that we were going to take over Greenland. And the motivation behind it was that our national security was at risk, that if we didn't do it, it is an Arctic nation, it is sovereign to Denmark, we have no business doing, I believe, what Mr. Trump was planning on doing, but in fact, he decided that our national security was at risk and that if we didn't do it, Russia was going to do it. I don't know, we had not heard any of that posturing by Putin. However, and when there was pushback by the European leaders, right? I mean, it's literally, we went over to their playground, and for us to go over there and then start playing, sort of aggressive bully games while we're over there is sort of a bit strange. But once again, he used tariffs as a threat, and we've seen how that worked. It worked in February, March, and April. It worked back in November. We've seen how the market responded, and we had a massive sell-off, 150 points on the S&P, almost 1,000 points on the Dow. It was clear. We had 25% move in the VIX as well. And then sure enough, by the next day's midday of the next day, he announced that he had changed his mind. He had, as you described, he had found a framework to deal with NATO. I'm not sure, we still don't really know what that looks like, but the market responded accordingly and was up spectacularly, getting back all of its losses with a second-day follow-through, up another 30 or 40 handles on that. So I think today is probably just, there's anxiety about the weekend. We're always one tweet away from crazy town, right, which is my favorite line. And so anything can happen over the next couple of days. So I think people are just setting the stage for a little less anxiety.
Yeah, and Peter, as we look ahead to next week, it is surprisingly the final trading week of January, and there's a lot to look forward to in terms of here in the U.S. So we had the Federal Reserve kicking off its January meeting, the first one of the year, and no changes expected, but we will be hearing from Powell. So, of course, all eyes will be on D.C. next week, but when we take a look back and see what sectors are gaining in terms of the major stock averages, in particular the S&P 500, we're looking at a rotation, right? Energy, materials, industrials higher compared to where we were at the end of last year. So will we see more of the same moving forward?
You know what, look, it really depends. If the Fed makes any kind of a move, which we're not anticipating, the probability is quite low, then I think you may see a continuation on rotation, because people are trying to position themselves for what the next couple of months are going to bring. We do believe that Mr. Trump is installing a new Fed chair who's going to be way more dovish, meaning that we are going to be on an interest rate cutting cycle. We're looking at probably another 300 basis points by year's end. How aggressive that is will really affect how people start positioning themselves. But as far as what sectors to really put your money in, I think look, we are seeing. I mean, we had a wonderful IPO here yesterday with Bitco, and you're going to be speaking to him soon. And so you're obviously looking at energy. I think energy is a really as if we're coming out of that wonderful meeting with Jensen in December, talking about how energy relates to the data centers and stuff like that, there is still a massive demand for tech, right? So I think that's going to be one of the things to keep your eye on. But I think all eyes are going to be on the Fed next week to see what their position is.
Well, there's a winter storm coming here in the U.S., especially on the northeastern seaboard. So let's see if you and I will be making it into the New York Stock Exchange. So I'll see you bright and early, hopefully on Monday.
Look forward to it. Happy trading, everyone.